Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've been running this ski and snowboard hire shop in Glenshee since 1976. Started it with my late husband back when people still paid for things with actual money and didn't expect the world handed to them on a silver platter. I'm 78 now, and I thought I'd seen everything in this business. Then one morning when my granddaughter showed me the email on the computer, she handles most of the online stuff because I can barely work the bloody thing half the time. She had this look on her face, somewhere between amused and annoyed. She told me I needed to see something and turned the screen toward me. I put on my reading glasses and squinted at it. Some agency, old fancy letterhead, and corporate nonsense, wanting to discuss a mutually beneficial partnership opportunity. I've learned that when people use 10 words where 2 would do, they're usually trying to pull something. I asked her what they wanted. She explained that they wanted free ski and snowboard hire for a family, and in exchange they'd promote us to their 350,000 followers. I raised an eyebrow. 350,000 followers. That's more people than live in most Scottish cities. Maybe this wasn't such a bad deal after all. We're a small family business, always looking for ways to bring in customers during the slower weeks. I told her to go ahead and accept me and to ask when they'd be coming. My granddaughter typed up a polite response. Professional, friendly, the kind of thing you'd expect from a local business trying to be accommodating. We didn't promise the moon, just said we'd get their equipment ready when they arrived. The reply came back 2 days later. My granddaughter opened it, started reading, and her face went through about 5 different expressions in the span of 10 seconds. She said I absolutely wasn't going to believe what she was looking at. She turned the screen toward me. There, in neat rows, was an itemized invoice. Not from us to them, mind you. From them to us. Accommodation costs, £727. Travel expenses, £456. Various expenditure, £500. Total amount due, £1,703. I had to read it 3 times before it sank in properly. I asked her to confirm that they wanted us to pay them £1,700 so they could come skiing for free. She said that was exactly what they wanted. I clarified that this was for 2 days of skiing. She confirmed it was just 2 days. I sat back in my chair. In all my years running this business, through recessions and boom times, through good snow years and terrible ones, I had never encountered anything quite this brazen. These people wanted a small ski hire shop in the Scottish Highlands to fund their entire holiday, and they thought we should be grateful for the opportunity. I told my granddaughter to get them on the phone. She suggested we should probably just email back and decline politely. I insisted on the phone. She dialed the number from their email signature. Some cheerful young woman answered, probably sitting in an office somewhere down in England, completely disconnected from how actual small businesses work. The woman thanked us for reaching out and said how excited they were about the partnership. I brought up the invoice they'd sent. She acknowledged it and explained that they itemize everything for transparency, saying it helps their partners understand the value they're receiving. I repeated her words back to her, asking about the value we were receiving. She confirmed that was correct, explaining we'd get exposure to 350,000 potential customers, which she claimed was worth far more than £1,700 when you really thought about it. My blood pressure was rising. My husband always said I had a temper, but I'd learned to control it over the years. Mostly. I told her I wanted to explain something to her. I said I've been running this business for 48 years and asked if she knew how I got customers during that time. She started to guess, mentioning word of mouth. I cut her off and explained it was by providing good service at fair prices, by treating people with respect, and by not sending invoices to potential customers demanding they pay for my holidays. She said she didn't think I understood how influencer marketing works. I told her I understood perfectly. I laid it out clearly that they wanted 1,700 quid so their influencer could go skiing for free, post a few pictures, and then what? We get customers who also expected everything for free. She insisted that their influencer had a very engaged audience and that the return on investment could be significant. I acknowledged her point about return on investment, then told her exactly what I'd return to them, which was absolutely nothing. I also suggested where she could invest her influencers and her invoice, and it wasn't anywhere polite. There was a long silence on the other end. She asked me to repeat what I'd just said. I told her she'd heard me fine the first time. Then I explained very carefully, very slowly, that we were a family business. We worked hard for our money. We didn't have £1,700 lying around to fund some stranger ski holiday just because they'd convinced a few 100,000 people to follow them online. I said if their influencer wanted to ski here, they could pay like everyone else. If they wanted to promote us afterward, that would be lovely, but we absolutely were not paying them to do it. She said my behavior was extremely unprofessional. I told her what was actually unprofessional was sending an invoice for £1,700 to a small business and calling it a partnership. Then I suggested she do us both a favor and lose our contact information. I hung up before she could respond. My granddaughter was staring at me with wide eyes. She said what I'd done was incredible. I asked if I'd gone too far. She said I was kidding, that it was perfect, and asked if she could post about this on our social media. I shrugged. Why not? Let people know what really goes on behind the scenes. She wrote up the whole story and posted it that evening. By morning, it had been shared thousands of times. Our phones started ringing with actual customers, people who appreciated that we weren't going to be pushed around by entitled influencers. Bookings increased by 30% over the next month. Turns out our actual customers, the ones who pay for their equipment and don't send invoices, were worth far more than 350,000 followers ever could be. I'm a parent to 2 daughters with my husband. Our older one is 12 and our younger one just turned 10. They're both amazing kids, but they're very different. Our 12-year-old has always been social, makes friends easily, knows exactly what to say in any situation. Our 10-year-old is autistic, and the world works differently for her. The thing about our younger daughter is that she struggles with communication. She doesn't always understand social cues, and sometimes she says things that come across mean, even though she doesn't intend them that way. She can be disruptive in class because she doesn't know how to express what she's feeling or thinking. We've been working on this with her therapist for years now, and we've seen progress, but it's slow. School is hard for her. Making friends is even harder. There's one kid in her class, I'll call him Bob, who she really doesn't get along with. I don't know all the details of their history, but from what I understand, they just clash. They've never been friends, and honestly, I think they actively dislike each other. About a week ago, Bob was handing out birthday party invitations at school. Now her school has this rule that if you're going to distribute invitations during class time and you're inviting the whole class, you can't exclude just a few students. It's meant to prevent exactly what happened next. Bob invited everyone in the class except my daughter. Her special education teacher called me that afternoon to let me know what had happened. She explained that since the invitations were distributed at school, we could file a complaint, and the school would mediate the situation. They would force Bob to invite my daughter to his party. She wanted to make sure I knew about the incident and told me that Bob had handed out birthday invitations during class, and my daughter was the only student who didn't receive one. This violated their classroom inclusion policy since he was distributing them at school. I asked how my daughter had taken it, and the teacher said she was very upset and that I should talk to her about it that evening. When my daughter got home, I could tell something was wrong immediately. She went straight to her room, and when I went to check on her, she was crying. I asked if she wanted to talk about what her teacher had told me. Through tears, she said that everyone got invited to Bob's party except her. Everyone. She was the only one. I told her I was sorry and that I knew it must hurt. She cried harder and said it wasn't fair. She wanted to know why everyone else got to go but not her. She really wanted to go to the party. She had a complete meltdown, the kind where she can't calm herself down, where everything feels like the end of the world. I sat with her until she exhausted herself. The next day I got a message from her homeroom teacher asking me to come in for a meeting with Bob's parents. The special education teacher had told her about the situation, and since it violated school policy, they wanted to resolve it. The implication was clear. They were going to make Bob invite my daughter. I thought about it all day. I thought about my daughter's tears, about how excluded she must have felt. But I also thought about something else. I replied to the teacher that I didn't want to file a complaint, even though what happened went against their policy. When my daughter found out, she was confused and angry. She wanted to know why I wasn't fighting for her. She reminded me that I always tell her to stand up for herself. I pointed out that she doesn't like Bob, that they don't get along. She said it didn't matter. She still wanted to go to his party because everyone else was going. I asked her why she wanted to go to a party thrown by someone she doesn't like. She said it was because she didn't want to miss out. It was going to be fun and she'd be the only kid who wasn't there. I understood that feeling. I really did. Being excluded hurts, especially when you're already struggling to fit in. I told her I had a question for her. I asked how she would feel if I told her that, for her birthday party next month, she had to invite Bob. Her reaction was immediate. She started yelling that she absolutely wouldn't do it. She didn't want him at her party. She said he was mean and that she hated him. I asked her that if she invited everyone else in her class and left him out, how did she think he would feel? She shouted that she didn't care because it was her party. I said exactly, and that this was Bob's party. I asked if she was this upset about the idea of inviting someone she doesn't like to her birthday. Could she imagine how upset Bob would be if we forced him to invite her? She stopped yelling, but only because she was processing what I'd said. Then she started crying again, harder this time. She kept saying it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair. She had another meltdown worse than the first one. My husband came home in the middle of it, and when I explained the situation, he agreed with my decision. He said he hated that she was hurting, but forcing that kid to invite her wasn't right either. He pointed out that what kind of party would it be if Bob was forced to have her there? He'd probably ignore her the whole time or worse. I agreed. I also said that she needs to understand that actions have results. If she doesn't get along with someone, that person isn't going to want her around. It took days for our daughter to calm down about it. She kept bringing it up, kept insisting it wasn't fair. She was right in a way. It wasn't fair. But life isn't fair. And she's going to face exclusion again. Maybe not because of a birthday party, but because of who she is and how she communicates. My husband and I talked about it late one night after both girls were asleep. He asked if I thought we made the right call. I said I didn't know, but I thought forcing that kid to invite her would have taught her the wrong lesson, that she can make people include her even when they don't want to. He said she's going to be excluded again, probably a lot. I told him I knew that, and maybe this way she'll start to understand why. The day of Bob's party came and went. Our daughter spent it at home, quiet and sad. I felt terrible watching her go through it, but I still think we made the right choice. There was this woman who lived 2 blocks over. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her because she was constantly complaining about something. She had a 10-year-old son who she seemed to think could do no wrong, no matter what he actually did. I'd seen some questionable parenting from her before, but nothing that really crossed the line until that afternoon in late September. I was heading out to grab some groceries around 2 in the afternoon. When I pulled out of my driveway, I noticed movement down the street. The silver sedan was weaving slightly, moving slower than normal but in an erratic pattern. At first I thought maybe the driver was elderly or looking for an address, but when I got closer, something felt off. That's when I saw him. The kid. He was barely tall enough to see over the steering wheel properly. His mother was in the passenger seat, and from what I could tell, she was on her phone, not even paying attention to the road. My first instinct was disbelief. Was I really seeing what I thought I was seeing? A 10-year-old behind the wheel, on a public street? Before I could process it fully, I saw him. There was a man in a wheelchair making his way across the street at the intersection ahead. He was a veteran who lived in the neighborhood. I'd seen him around many times, always friendly, always waving. His name was posted on one of those veteran recognition signs the neighborhood association had put up. He was about halfway across when I realized the kid wasn't slowing down. The car was still a good 50 feet away, but it wasn't stopping. The kid was accelerating slightly and the man in the wheelchair was right in his path. I could see the panic starting to show on the man's face when he tried to move faster, but wheelchairs don't exactly sprint. I didn't think. I just reacted. I gunned my engine and swerved my car directly into the intersection, positioning it between the oncoming sedan and the wheelchair. I slammed on my brakes and braced myself. The impact came almost immediately. The kid had zero reaction time, zero training. He crashed straight into the side of my car with a horrible crunching sound. My airbag deployed, and for a few seconds, everything was chaos. The smell of burned rubber, the hissing of a damaged radiator, my ears ringing. When I managed to get out of my car, the first thing I did was check on the man in the wheelchair. I asked him if he was okay and if he was hurt. He told me he was fine and that I just saved his life. He said that car was definitely going to hit him, and he had no way to get out of the way in time. The relief I felt was overwhelming. He was shaken but unharmed. Then I turned toward the sedan. The woman was already out of her car screaming. She walked straight up to me and got right in my face. She demanded to know what the hell was wrong with me and accused me of causing an accident. She said I was going to pay for everything. I stared at her. I told her that her kid had been driving and that he'd almost killed someone. She immediately denied it, insisting that she'd been the one driving. She called me insane and said I must be blind. I responded that I'd seen him behind the wheel and that everyone else would see it too. She kept screaming, getting louder and more aggressive. By now, other neighbors had started coming out of their houses. At least 5 or 6 people were standing on their lawns watching. Someone had already called the police. The kid was still sitting in the driver's seat, frozen and pale. When the officers arrived about 7 minutes later, she immediately launched into her version of events. She claimed she'd been driving, that I had recklessly pulled out in front of her, that she'd done nothing wrong. She said I was clearly at fault and should be arrested for reckless driving. She was loud, insistent, and incredibly convincing if you didn't know better. The officers separated us and started taking statements. I explained exactly what I'd seen. The kid behind the wheel, her on her phone, and the man in the wheelchair about to be hit. I told them I had no choice but to block the car or the man would have been killed. I pointed to the man, who was still nearby. One of the officers went to speak with him. I watched when the man explained what he'd seen, how the car had been heading straight for him, how I'd blocked it with my own vehicle, and how he'd clearly seen a child driving. He told the officer he would have been hit if I hadn't intervened. The officer returned to the woman and told her that they had a witness who confirmed her son was driving the vehicle. Her face went pale, then red. She called it ridiculous and accused the man of lying. She insisted they couldn't prove anything, and that he probably couldn't even see properly from that angle. The officer told her they were going to need to speak with her son. They brought the kid over. He was crying, terrified, his hands shaking. Within about 2 minutes of gentle questioning, he admitted everything. He said his mother had been letting him practice driving around the neighborhood for the past few weeks. He said she told him it was fine if they stayed on the side streets and that nobody would know. He said she'd been teaching him how to use the pedals and the steering wheel. He also said this was the 4th or 5th time they'd done it. The change in her demeanor was instant. She went from defiant to desperate, trying to claim it was just this one time, that she'd made a mistake, that she was sorry. She tried to say her son was confused and didn't know what he was saying. The officers weren't having it. One of them asked her directly if she'd been allowing her son to drive. She stammered and tried to backtrack, but it was too late. They arrested her right there. Child endangerment, reckless endangerment, allowing an unlicensed minor to operate a vehicle, contributing to the delinquency of a minor. The list went on. Her car was towed from the scene, damaged and impounded. The front end was completely smashed in from hitting my car. The man in the wheelchair gave his statement officially, and I gave mine. 2 other neighbors who had witnessed parts of what happened also came forward to give statements. One of them said they'd seen the kid driving before, but hadn't reported it because they weren't completely sure. Before the officers left, one of them told me I'd likely be contacted about pressing charges and that I should document everything for insurance and legal purposes. He also said what I did probably saved that man's life. I contacted a lawyer the next day. I'm suing her for the damage to my car, medical expenses from the airbag deployment, and emotional distress. The estimate for repairs came back at around $4,500. My lawyer says we have an airtight case, especially with the witness testimony and her son's admission. The insurance company also reached out to me and told me they're denying her claim entirely due to the unlicensed driver. That means she's liable for all damages out of pocket. The neighborhood's been quieter since then. I heard she's facing serious legal trouble, possibly even jail time. Her court date is set for next month. Her son was placed temporarily with relatives out of state while the case gets sorted out. Child Protective Services also got involved because of the repeated endangerment. Every time I see the man in the wheelchair now, he thanks me. He calls me a hero, though I don't feel like one. He told me his daughter called him crying after she heard what happened, grateful that someone had been there. I just did what anyone should have done. My car's still in the shop getting repaired, but honestly, I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat. The body shop said it'll be ready in another week or so. Some of the neighbors have started a group chat to keep an eye out for anything else suspicious. Turns out a few people had noticed odd things but never said anything. Now everyone's more willing to speak up when something doesn't seem right. My first grade year started out rocky from day one. Within the first 2 weeks of school, they pulled me out of my original classroom and moved me to a different teacher. I never got a real explanation, just that they thought it would be better for me. I was just starting to learn everyone's names when they moved me again a month later. That made twice in the first 2 months of school. Being shuffled around like that made it nearly impossible to feel settled or comfortable. I was always the new kid trying to figure out where I fit in. While other kids had their routines down and knew their classmates, I was constantly playing catch-up. Reading became my biggest struggle. Other kids seemed to pick it up naturally, but when I looked at a page of text, all I saw were confusing squiggles that didn't connect to anything. Letters and words felt like a foreign language I couldn't crack. My mom noticed how frustrated I was getting and decided to take action. She went around our entire house with a label maker and stuck words on everything. The refrigerator got a big label that said, refrigerator. The door had door on it. The table, the chairs, the couch, the television, the windows, everything had a word attached to it. At first, I thought it was weird having our house covered in labels, but it actually started to help. I'd walk past the refrigerator multiple times a day, and each time I'd sound out the letters. refrigerator. Eventually, the word stopped being individual letters and became a whole word I recognized. The same thing happened with all the other labels around the house. Our homework assignments were straightforward. At the beginning of the year, each student got a thin workbook filled with letter writing exercises. We were supposed to practice forming letters, both uppercase and lowercase, over and over. Every evening around 6 o'clock, I'd sit down at the kitchen table with my workbook. My mom would sit next to me while I carefully traced and wrote my A's, B's, C's, and so on. Some letters came easier than others. I remember struggling with the letter Q for some reason, but my mom would patiently help me until I got it right. When I finished the page, she'd look it over and sign her name at the bottom to show she'd reviewed my work. Then I'd pack the workbook carefully in my backpack so I could turn it in the next day. This became our nightly routine and I never missed a homework assignment. The school scheduled parent-teacher conferences twice a year, once in the fall and once in the spring. These meetings gave parents a chance to sit down with teachers and discuss how their children were doing. My mom went to the fall conference expecting to hear about the areas where I needed improvement and maybe get some advice on how to help me at home. She figured the teacher would mention my reading struggles and they'd come up with a plan together. What actually happened was nothing like she expected. My teacher sat across the table from her looking disappointed and concerned. She told my mom she needed to be completely honest about my progress or lack of it. She said I hadn't learned to write any of the letters of the alphabet yet. Not a single one. She said I was significantly behind all the other students in the class and she was worried about my development. My mom sat there confused. That didn't match what she'd been seeing at home every night. She told the teacher that couldn't be right because I'd been doing my homework every single evening. The teacher shook her head and said that was actually another major concern she needed to address. She told my mom I hadn't turned in a single completed homework assignment all year. Not one page of my workbook had been submitted. She asked the teacher if she was absolutely sure about that because she'd been signing off on completed homework pages every night for months. The teacher insisted she was certain. She said she kept careful track of homework submissions and I had a 0% completion rate. According to her records, I hadn't handed in anything. My mom knew something was seriously wrong with this picture. She'd personally watched me complete those pages night after night. She'd signed every single one. There was no way none of them had been turned in. She looked at the teacher's desk and noticed a stack of the thin homework workbooks sitting there. She suggested they pull out my workbook right then and look through it together to figure out what was going on. The teacher seemed reluctant but agreed. She reached for the stack and started flipping through the workbooks until she found the one with my name on it. She opened it to the first page. The page was completely filled in. My careful attempts at forming the letter A covered the worksheet in neat rows. At the bottom of the page were two signature lines. One line said parent signature and had my mother's signature on it. The other line said teacher signature and sat completely blank. The teacher flipped to the next page. Same thing. Completed work, my mother's signature. No teacher signature. She kept flipping through the workbook, page after page. Every single assignment that should have been completed was done. My handwriting showed the progression of learning, getting a little better and more confident with each page. My mother's signature appeared at the bottom of every completed page, dated to show when I'd finished the work. The teacher's signature line remained empty on every single one. The silence in that small conference room must have been thick enough to cut. My mom pointed out what was now obvious. I had been doing the homework. Every single page was completed and turned in. The teacher had my workbook sitting on her desk, where it had apparently been all along. She just never bothered to actually open it and look at the work inside. The teacher started stammering, trying to explain that she must have gotten confused or mixed up my workbook with someone else's, but her excuses fell flat. She'd sat there and told my mother I was failing first grade, that I couldn't write letters, that I never did homework, when the proof of my efforts literally sat in her hands. She'd made these serious claims about my abilities without ever checking the evidence right in front of her. But there was something else that happened during that conference that my mom found even more disturbing. Before they'd even looked at the workbook, when the teacher was explaining her concerns, she'd said something that stuck with my mom for years. She told my mom that while my progress was concerning, it would probably be fine as long as I could read and write by 5th grade. 5th grade? That was 4 full years away from 1st grade. My teacher had essentially written me off. She'd decided I was so far behind that the best we could hope for was basic literacy by the time I was 10 or 11 years old. And she seemed completely fine with that low bar. She hadn't checked my homework to see if I was actually trying. She hadn't implemented any special interventions or given my mom specific strategies to help at home. She'd just decided I was a lost cause and stopped paying attention. When my mom left that conference, she was furious. She realized she couldn't trust this teacher to actually educate me. If the teacher couldn't even be bothered to open a workbook before declaring a student a failure, what else was she neglecting? My mom decided right then that she'd take over my reading education herself. She doubled down on the label strategy at home. She added even more labels to things, including labels on my toys with their names. Every night she sat with me and we read together. She'd read a page, and I'd try to read the same page. She made up games where I had to find specific words on the labels around the house. She bought simple books with repetitive text that helped me recognize common words. She turned everything into a learning opportunity without making it feel like pressure. When we went grocery shopping, she'd have me find items by reading the signs. When we drove somewhere, she'd ask me to read street signs out loud. She made learning to read feel natural instead of like a chore. And it worked incredibly well. By the end of 1st grade, I caught up to my classmates. By the end of 2nd grade, I was reading at a 4th grade level. By the time I reached 3rd grade, I was reading books meant for 6th graders. Throughout the rest of elementary school and into middle school, my reading level consistently stayed 2 to 3 years ahead of my actual grade. I became the kid who always had a book in hand. Reading went from being my biggest struggle to being my greatest strength, and I had my mom to thank for that, not my first grade teacher. That teacher never did apologize for what happened at that conference. My mom requested I be moved to a different classroom after that meeting, but the principal said it was impossible since I'd already been moved twice, so I stayed in that class for the rest of the year. The teacher did start signing off on my homework after that, probably because she knew my mom was watching, but the relationship was damaged. My mom checked my workbook every week to make sure the teacher was actually reviewing my work. She made sure to stay involved in my education and never just assume the teacher was doing her job. I sometimes wonder if that teacher ever felt embarrassed about what happened. She sat there in that conference making serious accusations about a 6-year-old's abilities without doing the basic work of checking the evidence. She had my workbook on her desk the entire time. All she had to do was open it, but she couldn't be bothered, and she was ready to write off a first grader as unteachable. I also wonder how many other kids she did this to. How many other students got labeled as struggling or lazy when really the teacher just wasn't paying attention. I was lucky that my mom had the time and resources to teach me herself. Not every kid has that, but my mom made sure I got the education I deserved, even when she had to provide it herself. And honestly, those labels on everything in our house worked so well that I'd recommend this strategy to any parent whose kid is learning to read. It's simple, it's cheap, and it turns your whole house into a learning environment. Though I'll admit, having refrigerator taped to the fridge did look pretty silly to visitors. I spent 2 years thinking I was a complete failure with money. My credit score was a disaster and I had no idea why. I checked it obsessively, feeling sicker every time I saw the number. I went through everything trying to find the problem. Old utility bills, medical payments, that parking ticket from college. I was convinced I'd messed up somewhere without realizing it. The rejections started piling up quietly. Credit cards, loans, even apartment applications. I stopped trying after a while. The anxiety was too much. I started believing maybe I just wasn't responsible enough. Maybe I was bad with money and didn't even know it. The self-doubt ate me alive for months. Last month, I applied for a basic secured credit card. Just something small to try, rebuilding whatever mess I thought I'd created. The bank guy pulled up my file and went silent. Then he looked at me like something didn't add up. He asked if I'd had certain accounts since 2022. I had no idea what he was talking about. He explained that 3 credit cards and a personal loan were showing up under my name. All of them had missed payments and high balances. I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. My hands went numb. I told him there had to be a mistake. He turned the screen toward me. My name, my social security number, accounts I'd never opened, balances I'd never charged, late payments I'd never made. I drove home in complete silence. My brain couldn't process it. Identity theft. Someone had stolen my information and destroyed my credit, while I sat around blaming myself for imaginary mistakes. When I got home, my mom was in the kitchen making tea like it was any other day. I stood in the doorway holding the printout the bank gave me. My hands were shaking. I asked her if she'd opened credit cards in my name. She didn't even look up from her mug. She said, "Oh, so I'd found out about that." Not a question, not an apology, just a flat statement like I'd discovered she'd borrowed my sweater without asking. I asked if she was serious. She said I didn't need good credit for anything anyway. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the audacity was so staggering, I didn't know what else to do. She said it like my future was irrelevant. Like rebuilding credit was some optional hobby I could pick up whenever I felt like it. I told her I'd been rejected from apartments and couldn't get a car loan. I'd spent years thinking I was failing at being an adult. She pointed out that at least now I knew it wasn't my fault. She said it like that made everything better, like knowing the truth somehow canceled out 3 years of stress and self-hatred. I told her she'd stolen my identity and committed fraud. I asked if she understood what that meant. She told me not to be dramatic and said it wasn't like she meant to hurt me. I reminded her that she'd ruined my credit score and made me think I was irresponsible when it was her the entire time. She explained that she'd needed the money because things were tight. I asked why she'd destroyed my financial future instead of asking for help. She finally looked at me and there was no guilt in her eyes, just annoyance that I was making a big deal out of it. She said I was young and would rebuild it. That's when I realized she genuinely didn't think she'd done anything wrong. In her mind, my credit was just this abstract thing she could borrow without facing any problems, like it would magically repair itself while I waited around. I left the kitchen before I said something I couldn't take back. I locked myself in my room and started Googling. Identity theft by a family member, how to file a police report against a parent, how to dispute fraudulent accounts. Every search result made my stomach turn. The next morning I went to the police station. The officer who took my report looked uncomfortable the whole time. He asked if I understood that filing this report meant my mother could face criminal charges. I said I understood. He asked if I was sure I wanted to go through with it. I told him she'd stolen my identity and ruined my credit for 3 years. Yes, I was sure. He took down everything, the account numbers, the dates, the amounts. When I left, I felt hollow but also strangely relieved, like I'd finally stopped letting her get away with it. I filed disputes with all 3 credit bureaus, sent certified letters, collected documentation. It's been a slow, painful process. Some of the accounts are still sitting there like ghosts. The bureaus want police reports and affidavits and proof that I didn't authorize anything. It's exhausting. My mom hasn't apologized once. She's angry that I involved the police. She told my aunt I'm being vindictive and trying to ruin her life over a mistake. A mistake like she accidentally used my social security number multiple times over several years. I moved out 2 weeks ago. Stayed with a friend until I could scrape together enough for a deposit on a tiny studio. It's not much, but it's mine and she can't touch anything here. I opened a new checking account at a completely different bank. Got one of those secured cards that only lets you spend what's already in your account. No credit line, no risk, just slow, boring progress. $5 purchases that auto-pay from my checking. It feels like starting over from zero, but at least it's mine this time. The fraud investigation is still ongoing. The detective said it could take months. My mom might face charges. Part of me feels guilty about that. The other part remembers her shrugging and saying, I didn't need good credit anyway. I'm 24 years old and I'm rebuilding my financial life like a teenager getting their first credit card. But at least now I know the truth, and at least now she can't touch anything else. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.